You're listening to the Better People Podcast. I'm Tom Warner. With me today is Rhonda Ramirez, a licensed professional counselor from Central Texas. Today we're talking about self-care, the good and the bad. So Rhonda, how would you define self-care?
When I talk about self-care, I really am talking about healthy habits that you're creating. I think often now self-care is a real buzz term, and it often implies that you are doing something physical for yourself and maybe by yourself, and I think that is not necessarily the best way to do that because we all need each other. And so in my mind, self-care is more of creating healthy habits and being self-aware of when you need to put those healthy habits in the forefront of your mind, not just something that you do on a daily basis.
Okay, so like an example, I'll see people post like they went to Starbucks getting a mani-pedi, self-care. You know, they'll put hashtag self-care.
Right. I mean, that's a very surface level thing. I think there's a lot more to it because, I mean, they do take time away from your normal schedule to do and to be intent on doing. But I think it involves more the mental and spiritual side of things, not just the physical, let me take a break thing.
So what would be an example of like a mental self-care?
So I have a whole list.
Wow.
I the habits, healthy coping skills, because generally we're trying to cope with stressors in our life. They may be big, they may be tiny. It does. When it's stress, it's stress. So I just like to employ some healthy coping skills, really, and some of them are super easy and things you can do without even other people noticing. I'm going to step back though just for a minute and say and revisit the idea of being self-aware, mm-hmm. because that's really that's going to be the key to noticing when you need to step up your healthy habits, your healthy coping skills. Some of these things are things that we should do kind of on a daily basis, but some of these things are things that we might add to our normal routine to give us a little more alleviation of the stressors that are going on in our lives. And so you have to be self-aware of when you are feeling overwhelmed and are feeling stressed. A lot of the times I see people who are stressed 100% of the time, so they don't even know when they're not stressed because it's so normal. So sometimes we have to start with, let's notice what stress feels like and what does that look like in your own life. That can lead to some unhealthy coping skills. And sometimes those unhealthy coping skills are the red flags to say, okay, I'm not dealing with my stress well. I may be eating too much, eating not enough, sleeping too much, sleeping too little. Drinking in an inappropriate way or using substances in an inappropriate way. Just kind of intentionally checking out of relationships and interactions with people because it's too much or too overwhelming or everything else is too much and it's just one more thing on your plate. When we isolate or when we are intentionally procrastinating because it's just not doable, those are little tiny red flags that say, hey, I'm dealing with a lot of stress and these are some negative ways that I'm trying to cope with it, but they're not really working. And so you have to be kind of self-aware to see that we're choosing some things that are not working. And then that means once you're aware of it, then you can say, okay, let's counter those kind of negative coping skills with some positive ones and see if we can turn the tide here and figure out how we can take care of ourselves, the idea of self-care, to take care of ourselves, not only physically, but mentally, emotionally, and spiritually as well.
So would you say the concept of self-care has, I'm going to say that it's probably a millennial term.
I would agree.
But I've wondered, if it's a term that's gone through different words over the years, because in a way, self-care can be, I'm going to take time to read a book, or but I guess that's the interesting part is you do have to analyze, what is causing me the stress issue. And I'm thinking of things that I may do myself or others, they'll procrastinate. But I notice it seems to be unhealthy when it starts leading into social lives and like personal care. And I don't mean like self-care. I mean like taking a shower.
Correct.
Washing your clothes.
Like there's the normal daily things that we have to do to keep up our normal life in society. So yes, I do think it is the idea of the word self-care is more millennial, but it is something that we have always kind of had to deal with. And yes, you do have to notice when you shift to using those things that are not necessarily the healthiest. And that's when you're like, okay, I'm not doing well dealing with some of these things. And sometimes the not doing well is just, I avoided talking to my friend who just called. I sent them to voicemail when I normally would pick up because I loved them so much, I adore them, but I totally avoided it because it just seems too overwhelming to talk to them.
That's a good point because I'll see, I'll see the memes and I'll see the jokes. The introverted kind of jokes, and it's like, why did you call when you could have texted? They'll see those jokes going around, and they were funny, but at some point you're like, that's not healthy for society to be like that, to be closed off.
Right. Well, and I'm an introvert too. So there are times.
I am too. So yeah, I get it.
So there are times when that's just a normal thing that I do, but then there are times when I intentionally choose to avoid the conversation because I don't even know if I can give anything to them. And that's where it's important to notice kind of the reasoning behind some of your choices, is deciding, am I, is this because I'm avoiding just interacting with people? Is this because, or, if you're busy, that's a whole nother story. Mm-hmm. You're at work, you can't answer the phone. That's a whole nother story. But if you're intentionally doing it because it is just too much, then that's where the little red flag comes in and says, okay, pay attention because I think we're not dealing with our stressors well. And so that even those little tiny things that most people would notice, and I say most people would notice because I'm an introvert, so people now, my friends, do not get offended if I don't answer the phone because they know sometimes I'm doing something else and I just wouldn't pick up. But when I know that that's my motivation, just to avoid interacting, then I know that I'm not handling my stress well. And so that's why I say you have to be, you have to kind of be self-aware of your motivations for some of the things that you're doing.
Right.
Because you have to notice when is it that it's tipping over to the unhealthy side.
Right. Well, and that's what's interesting. Oh, I was just going to say, it's like when, I hate to use this example because it's very unmillennial phrase, but it's like if you're going to, it's hard to know that about yourself because it's like the old boiling a frog scenario, which I know people listening, that's gross. Well, how do you boil a frog? We don't pour a frog right into the hot water. You slowly raise the heat, and then the frog doesn't know what's happening. And I know it's a lot of times it's easy, and eventually the frog is cooked, but I know it's easy sometimes when you're in those situations with stress that it's just been building and building and building and you've been managing, but it's hard to recognize those signs until finally you just break down.
Correct. And so, that's why sometimes you have to just step back and decide what is this motivation coming from, and really just, and that's why self-awareness is so important, is because we will fall into what works, and unhealthy, negative coping skills, they work. They just don't work well, and they're not sustainable. They're coping skills for a reason, but they're negative. So they leave some consequences that you might not have thought of. And just like in my example of not answering your friend's call, well, if you do that enough, your friend will quit calling, because every time they call, you're avoiding them. Well, they don't know that you're avoiding them because it's too much. They just think that maybe you don't want to be friends anymore, which is a negative consequence. So, it's just kind of being aware and saying, okay, here we are. I'm not dealing with some of these things well, and this is how I know. I'm doing things that maybe I normally wouldn't do, or that I've just done for so long, but I think it's probably not a good thing.
So what would be in your mind, kind of talking about self-care, what would be maybe healthy? Well, I say maybe we analyze what's considered just surface self-care, and then what would you say is more meaningful self-care? Once you've established, here's what's stressing me, here's what's causing me issues.
So I think the surface self-care are the things that you kind of see on social media, and yes, kind of see those things like, oh, I got myself a Starbucks today, or I did my nails, or if you're a parent, maybe, I spent 20 minutes outside by myself, without the family, so I could just breathe. Maybe some of those things might be helpful. But there's some other things that are pretty meaningful that you can start just putting in your life as a little vent, so that the stress doesn't build up so much. So I would say things like the thing that I think super important that's kind of weird is that I think adults don't value play enough. And I think that sometimes you have to kind of insert a little playfulness and a little childlike wonder back into your life. And that can be like a self-care thing, because you're letting go of the stressors of adulthood, all of the things that keep us responsible.
Well, now I have to ask you for an example.
Like, small things would be even like sitting and blowing bubbles and really just watching the bubbles go through the air. Something that might be a little bigger is trying something new that you've never done before and never thought you would. Last year, I decided that I was going to try to learn how to play guitar. Well, I'm like a 42-year-old woman who has been doing her jobs for a long time. So it's been a really, really long time where I had to learn something completely new. But that intriguing feeling of like, oh, I remember when I was younger and I didn't know the stuff I know now. And that was playful. Now, listen, I can't play anything on the guitar at all. Nothing. But I did take lessons for a whole semester or two, depending on how COVID went. And it made me feel like, oh, it's good to remember that you can learn things new, you know? And that's a feeling that I had as a kid. I think just anything that feels playful and not as serious, because I understand that life is important, but life doesn't have to be all that serious all the time.
Right.
And so I think that playfulness that you might have had as a child just needs to come out. And when you do that, that alleviates a little bit of stress, because you're giving your brain just a tiny bit of break from all of the adult responsibilities.
So would you say learning a new skill is more of a mindset change more than it's, because I hear people say, you can't teach an old dog new tricks, and is it really just changing your perspective?
For sure. And I'm a counselor, never say that you can't teach an old dog new tricks, but I would say you can't teach somebody who doesn't want to learn new tricks. Because I can't teach anyone who doesn't want to learn, but it doesn't matter how old you are. If you want to learn, you can. So, it is that perspective change of, because I also think sometimes, as an adult, we get into the persona that we need to be the expert at what we do, or we need to be knowledgeable about what we do. And it just alleviates stress when you get back to, listen, we're all trying here. None of us know what's going on. We're trying our best, so let's have a little fun while we do it. So I think play is an important part of healthy coping skills. And sometimes, if you have kids, you can play with your kids, and that kind of brings you back to, oh, I remember that feeling. That was fun. I didn't think about the bills and the laundry and the stuff I have to do at work for the last 30 minutes because we've been playing with the cars or whatever it is,
Well, that's a good point. Having kids myself, I look at, they'll play hide and seek, or they'll play these little silly games, and I'm thinking back, of course I see it as an adult, and I'm like, kids, it's so exhausting. I don't have time for that. But then looking back, I'm thinking, do you know what? I used to love to catch fireflies, I used to love to build a couch fort,
Right.
And those were fun for me. And I'm sure my parents were thinking the same thing I was, but I look back and I'm like, I'm going to build myself a fort, and of course, unfortunately our cushions won't come off the couch, but I look at those times, and John, my 7-year-old he gets his medical supplies in a big box, massive big box, and he played with that box for at least 4 or 5 days until we finally had to say, okay, it's going to recycling, and it was
right.
And
right.
I was like disappointed that we were like having to throw it away. I'm like, but that's a good box. He's playing in it.
Yeah.
And he wanted to eat his breakfast in the box. He wanted to eat his lunch in the box. He'd try to put the dog in the box with him, and which that dog didn't really care for that. But it was, he would, and that was his fun, and he would hide in there, and he would have his older brother Joseph close him up in the box, and he would say, hey, have Dad come find me, and it was just, and I'm thinking back, and that was something, those were kinds of things I enjoyed. Climbing trees, it was just, I've not climbed a tree in years, I don't know if I could get out of the tree if I did, but, I look back.
Like some of those things are harder to do now, but I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No, it was fine. I was just going to say, it's just using your imagination. I used to, there was a rock at my parents' house that I used to pretend was a ship, and I would, put my bicycle upside down and pretend the bicycle wheel was the wheel for the, it was just that kind of stuff. I'm going to make a list of things to do after this.
Well, the bottom line of play really is being in the moment. As adults, we have so many things on our plate, and we have so many responsibilities that we're trying to keep up with, that we're often not in the moment because we're thinking 2 and 3 steps ahead. And the idea of play really puts you in the moment. Right.
Because you're thinking about, I got bills to pay, or I got to go grocery shopping, or, and if you're us, I've got to place my grocery order for pickup, which further divides the society, but that's another story. I love my HEB pickup, but it's just so fascinating. So you're saying simple things like play can help, And I guess that
Yes.
can maybe lead you to other things that are positive. It gets your imagination flowing again.
For sure. And it does bring you to that remembering how to be in the moment and not have to do everything, the web of responsibilities that we're thinking about, which being in the moment is really good to alleviate stress, because often stress, excuse me, often stress are things that are going to happen in the future. And so when we can focus ourselves in this particular moment and whatever we are doing, it's either whatever we are doing or whoever we are with, and really putting our effort into that, then those things kind of go to the back burner, and they don't have as much weight because we are really in the moment.
So, and it kind of leads me, and this is probably a deeper question, but what do you do whenever you're done playing and then you realize things are starting to creep back in again? I wonder.
Yeah. So when you're done playing, just take first a really good mental note of what that feeling feels like and how it feels pretty free. And then as you go back to, your normal daily life or whatever, remember that this is how I can access this feeling. And maybe it doesn't have to be such an extensive event. Maybe it's, which sounds silly, but if you're in a workplace where you can joke a little bit with your coworkers in a healthy manner and can have a moment where you can say, man, let me tell you a story or something, so that everybody kind of stops for a minute, then maybe you can access that same kind of free feeling, even though you don't have to do the whole event. Does that make sense at all?
It does. Yeah. No, I'll admit it's been challenging because of COVID, where people are working remotely.
For sure.
But I mean, myself, like my full-time job, which is not this. This does not pay the bills, but in fact, it's costing me. But the thing is, being able to, I have started to go back to work, and I've missed that. There's not a lot of people up there, but I have noticed that I've missed that ability to just get up and go talk to a friend or say, hey, how's it going today? What's on your plans? Because prior to that, it was, I've got to schedule a Teams call, and I don't want to bug them if they're in the middle of something. And so you just didn't randomly chat somebody up on a system unless you just, in my case, needed to talk to them. And now it's easier. I can just yell across the room and say, hey, Robert, what you doing for lunch? And so we've taken a lot of that. We've taken a lot of that for granted. But so you're saying play is a simple thing that can help, and it's considered self-care in this case.
Yeah, I would say so. Another easy thing that I think is easily usable is being aware that sometimes you just need a break. And that would be physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, any of those. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I don't necessarily need a physical break, but I need a mental break from what I'm doing. Maybe I've been working on the computer on paperwork for a while, and I really do just need a mental break to do something different. So again, I'll either talk to some people who are in my vicinity, or I may, and when I say break, sometimes even as an adult, I use this with my students, but even as an adult, sometimes I need to put a timer on my breaks because the breaks seem so much more fun than the actual work. Yeah. So I, as an adult, as a 40-year-old adult, I put a timer on my phone sometimes when I know it's going to be more fun to do the break than the work. And I give myself maybe 10 minutes if I can. And then, I have 10 minutes to talk to somebody. Or if I'm at my house and I need a physical, mental, emotional break, I have 10 minutes to put on my favorite song and dance it out. Or 10 minutes to play a little toss with the dog. Or just 10 minutes to walk around, like go outside and walk around the actual house and get some fresh air and a little bit of different environment. Or put a song on that you like to sing, or and you could also do snacks, but they kind of have to be healthy.
That can lead to other unhealthy coping mechanisms. Yeah.
Yes, I was going to say, they kind of have to be healthy snacks if we're going to do a snack break.
Right.
Or even just getting up and physically stretching.
Right.
Just kind of depending on what you need. But yes, as a 40-year-old adult, I do put a timer on my phone for that, because I will never go back to doing the dishes if I am dancing it out.
That's interesting. My favorite song. When I do the dishes, I'm not saying I love the dishes, but when I do the dishes, for me, it's like a relaxing, like just
so
warm
meditative
water
for you,
kind of, somewhat, yeah. Or making the bed. For me, it's that order of applying order to chaos. That kind of a thing. I was gonna say one benefit of working from home, and nothing really keeps me from doing it at work. It's not as conducive, but because it's a busy street. But I used to, at noon, I would stop whatever I'm doing, and I'd go for like a 20-30 minute walk, around the neighborhood, and have music going, so I could listen to music, sing, and walk at the same time, and that really
at the same time
helped me. And I say cope. I mean, it's not like I'm there's stresses dealing with jobs, and there's people who have jobs that I can completely understand. Like, I don't pour concrete, so we're not talking like a manual labor kind of stuff, but problem solving type issues, and I should clarify that if you're in the concrete business, that it also requires the same type of efforts. I'm not, but what I'm getting at is my job isn't one that's like I'm having to save lives, definitely not necessarily, but it's such you get into those, your mind feels, and the best way for me to describe it is like a pretzel. Your mind just gets this knot feeling, or sometimes I've had it to where it's like my brain is on fire. It's so numb from everything being thrown at it that I cannot, that I'm just exhausted sometimes. And it feels like if I could describe it as pain, it's not pain, but it is pain, and so for me getting up, walking, and for me, I mean, I kind of miss, I say that I kind of miss doing that a little bit. I work at the church occasionally. I have, before I was at where I'm now in Waco, but I was working out of the church, and I would walk around the grounds, around noon, and I would go look at the creek, and I would go out to the rock around the church. And I said, I was basically in my mind, I'm thinking, I'm looking for issues or anything that they need to know about, but also it was for me to get out and look at the squirrels. That was the other thing.
Yeah.
So,
well, when you have a change of environment, and especially if you go outside, it boosts everything in your brain. It gives you you've got some nice fresh air that you can kind of breathe deeply, because we do breathe a little differently outside than we do inside, just kind of weirdly. Mm-hmm. But every time I step outside, almost every time I step outside, I take a deep breath, because I don't know, I just feel grateful that there's beautiful things around me. And then if you take those moments to notice the things around, to notice how the tree is growing, or to notice that the creek is a little more dry today, but yesterday it was full, or, any of those little things. And especially if you work in an office all day, you just need a little change of environment to kind of boost your mood. And like you said, the stress may look different in different work environments or lives, but stress is stress. It's nobody has none, and everyone has something that they're trying to maneuver and figure out with the requirements of just living.
Right.
So, it may be physical for some, it may be mental for some, it may be spiritual or emotional for some, and it may be all of them for somebody at one time, and it may be just a couple. But stress is stress, and it just manifests differently in each life depending on who you are and what you're doing.
Yeah, well, it's like a balloon squeeze. I've had a doctor, a psychiatrist, tell me years ago that when you, and full disclosure for those listening, I've got I'm been clinically diagnosed with obsessive compulsive disorder when I was a teenager, and versus just saying, "Oh, I'm a clean freak. I've got OCD." No, I had as a medical doctor tell me that, and I was on medication, but he told me that the anxiety that you feel is like a balloon squeeze. So you treat one part of it, and it may manifest itself. If you squeeze a balloon, that's where you get it. If you squeeze a balloon, you'll notice you can't contain the whole balloon, that parts of it pop out in different places. And he's described it very similar to that. Now, you want it to pop out in healthy ways of processing it.
Correct.
For one, I'm going to smoke myself to death, or I'm going to start running, which is the better of the two to choose from. And so, and that's kind of, or I could eat everything in front of me, or I can go for the walk, which one helps me to process it better, and which one's healthier. And that was kind of his perspective was with OCD. In my case, it was, I did the classic OCD signs, and he said, hey, you may notice this goes away, but you'll see it may manifest itself in other ways.
Somewhere else.
Yeah. You just be aware of that. And it just, that stuck with me over all those years that it's a balloon squeeze.
That's a great visual. I generally use like a ketchup packet, and when we squeeze it and keep everything inside, it goes all over everybody. But I love that balloon squeeze visual, because it does do a better job of explaining that, hey, it goes from one place to another. It doesn't always disappear.
Right. Now, I say that this was how old am I? Oh gosh, it was longer than, it was 20 years ago, I guess, that maybe 20, more than that. So I don't know if the logic has changed, and I know sometimes treatment systems change, but it was something that just stuck.
I think it's true, because when we have either bad habits or good habits, if they change, another habit fills its spot.
Right.
Just like addictions, if we're addicted to one thing, we almost have to fill that spot, even if it's, sugar. If we're addicted to sugar, we have to fill that spot with something else.
Right.
It doesn't, and it may, who knows what that will be. Maybe a good thing like lemon water. I don't know, but, but in general, as humans, things don't completely disappear. They're there somewhere, and maybe they're just, sometimes we can put them in a box and put them away for a little while, and we're good. And sometimes there are if they're really hard things, we might have to work a lot and put them in a box and put them away for a while. But other than that, they usually kind of switch back and forth and flow. And yeah, sometimes we have those unhealthy coping skills that we have to fill with healthy ones. And then we also have to be aware that any coping skill, when it's too much or too little, is not healthy. Even running, if we're not moving at all, that would be me. Then it's not a healthy thing. But if we're running, that's great. And maybe we're running to kind of get outside and get that little break. But if we are running too much, that's also a concern as well, So the other thing I like to talk about when we talk about just healthy habits is to make sure that we're kind of in balance. Excessive in any direction is concerning. Because it can always fall to the negative, regardless of whether it starts out positive or not. I have a whole list of coping skills.
Well, I'll tell you what we'll do.
I said we've only talked about two.
I know. I want to talk about them, but I tell you, I don't know if we want to spend 6 hours. Maybe we do. But if you've got a long car trip, this might be great. I'll tell you what we'll do though is I'll go ahead and let you go, and we'll make this maybe a part two. Maybe we may not do it consecutively weekly, but I think this is definitely something to explore as we go down that path. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and kind of wrap us up here, and then just hang on the line for a little bit, and I'll come back and we'll follow up with those details. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So one moment. All right, folks, you've been listening to the Better People podcast. This has been Rhonda Ramirez talking to you, a licensed professional counselor from Central Texas. If If you have any questions for us, go ahead and you can send them in by emailing hello@betterpeoplepodcast.com. And we'll do our best to answer them. Or if you've got other areas you're working on for improvement, let us know. We're definitely not to replace a doctor or a counselor by any means, but we're here to at least maybe see where we can help. Thanks for listening.